Yes, I am horrifically sunburned. Thank you so much for asking. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am going to take you through some of the books that are on my bookshelf that are maybe a little bit older than I am. So I have read quite a lot of books that were published after I was born, and I've read quite a lot of books that are recently published, but there's also quite a lot of books either on my Kindle or here on my physical bookshelf that are just around a little bit longer than I am. So, as of now, the oldest book that I have is a complete collection of the works of William Shakespeare. I will admit to having only studied 2 plays, and there are other ones that I would love to read. I've studied The Merchant of Venice and I have studied Hamlet, but I would love to read more of his works. I'd love to get into the sonnets. I'd love to read a lot more of his plays and actually just delve a little bit more into why he was one of our greatest writers. The next couple of books that I have all come from the same author, which is Jane Austen, and the oldest of her books that I own is Pride and Prejudice. I'm going to admit that I have not read Pride and Prejudice, but I am pretty much familiar with what happens. I pretty much know that it's a kind of romance story between the courtship of Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, and I have a feeling that they're kind of not well suited to each other, but that things kind of develop between them between the course of the book. I'm going to admit that quite a lot of what I know about the Pride and Prejudice story comes from having watched a kind of a compilation clip where John Mulaney's voice and stand-up routines are kind of interspersed with what happens in the 2005 film version. The next book of Jane Austen's that I own is Emma, and I know that this was the basis of the film Clueless, which is one of my favourite films of all time. So I'm kind of trying to separate the two of those in my head so that I can go into Emma and completely have a blank canvas, treat it like a book that I've never picked up before, that I've never experienced anything of, and that I've never heard anything about. Because I know from having tried like a couple of pages of it or so that I keep going, oh, so this relates to this character in the film, and this is this, and this is this. I need to just go in completely fresh and completely forget about everything that happens in the film. The next 2 books of Jane Austen's that I have were both published in 1817. So you have got Northanger Abbey and you have got Persuasion. A friend of mine gave me a copy of Persuasion when I was like 25 or 26. And I have got a copy of Northanger Abbey from NetGalley that I still have got to read. I know that Northanger Abbey is slightly different to what Jane Austen had usually read. I think it's more of a gothic book and a slightly more of a kind of a satire parody book, but I'm still really interested to read it. And the reason that my friend gave me Persuasion is that it's her favourite of the Jane Austen books, and I always love reading what my best friend's favourite books are, and I feel like that tells you a lot about a person, what their favourite book is, so I'm really excited to discover that one. The next oldest book that I own was published in 1843, and it is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I read this book every single Christmas without fail, either a Kindle version that I already have, or I will go and look for an audio version. I actually really love listening to the audio version, and I found one last year that is narrated by Hugh Grant, which I really, really enjoyed. It's one of my favourite Christmas stories, and it kind of reminds you about doing away with materialism and just spending time with the people that you love at Christmas, and how having people around is worth much more than money. The next oldest book on my shelf was published in 1868, and it is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I've read this about 3 or 4 times throughout my whole life, I'd say. I think the first copy that I ever had was only Little Women and not also Good Wives. But this one is definitely chunky enough that it has both. I haven't actually read this copy yet, but I'm going to watch the 2019 film first and then go back and read this one, and I am so excited to get back into the world of the March Sisters. So let's jump quite a lot into the future. The next oldest book that I have was published in 1949, and it is 1984 by George Orwell. I read this in maybe August of last year, and I don't know what I was expecting of it, but I didn't really connect with it as much as I thought that I would. It is a really great story, and I did really enjoy reading it, but I think I was expecting a little bit more out of the book. The next oldest book on my shelf is actually a full series, and that is The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. I'll admit to having only read 2 so far, The Magician's Nephew and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, but I would love to go back and actually rediscover the 2 that I've already read, as well as continuing on the series. The next oldest book on my shelf was published in 1952, and it's one of my favourite books of my childhood. Definitely one that you should read with your kids. It is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. I really love the story of the friendship between Wilbur the pig and Charlotte, and how Wilbur kind of becomes a local celebrity when Charlotte goes to every length that she can imagine to save his life when he's been fattened up to be kind of sacrificed. The next oldest book that I have was published in 1954, and it's Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I got this copy very kindly from Shannon from 155 Books. This is one that I know is studied in schools in the UK, but this was never actually on the curriculum in Ireland any time that I was in school. So I definitely feel like I've missed out on something. I know that this is about the anarchy that kind of happens when a group of schoolboys are deserted on an island and have to kind of fend for themselves and make their own kind of government. So we're going to jump a little bit forward again. The next book on the list was published in 1985, and it is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This is one of my favourite dystopians of all time, but it's also a completely terrifying read, especially when you're a woman and you're reading about how many rights have been taken away from women, how many things they are completely not permitted to do. There have been a couple of moments in reality where I have genuinely felt like I'm living in Gilead, and reading this book over the last couple of years has definitely been an eye-opener. The next book on the list was published in 1986, and it's again one of a series. I don't have the first one with me, but I do have one of the later books in the series. I have got a copy of New York, New York, which is one of the Babysitters Club books. I've spoken about the Babysitters Club time and time again here, but it is one of my favourite series of all time. I have read, I think, about 25 to 30 of the books by now, which is really good going when you hear that there's about 136 of them to read. I do go back to this series when I'm having a reading slump or when I'm looking for something that's a little bit quicker and a little bit more enjoyable. But that's not to say that this series isn't full of really difficult topics to deal with, such as bereavement, being a child of divorce, illness, chronic illness. There is so much that you can discuss with these books. Finally, the book that was published closest to the year that I was born, that is on my shelves at the moment, is a book that was published in 1988, and it is Matilda by Roald Dahl. This is one of my favourite books of all time. It is the book that started out my reading life, so I think it is only fitting that I keep a copy of it in pretty much everywhere that I go. So those are just some of the books that I have that are slightly a little bit older than I am. Are there any books that are on your shelves that are older than you are? Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.